Thank you.
Early and intermediate stage of HCC. So I will start with a little introduction of HCC and staging, and then we'll move to this thing, treatment part. Okay. So HCC represents 70 to 90% of primary liver cancers, and the rest are metastasis, because various metastases also occur in liver. So to define whether it is a primary liver cancer, metastasis is also very important to start with for treatment point of view. And liver cancer has been one of the important cause of cancer-related mortality. Most of the cancers HCC arise in the background of cirrhosis, almost all, and it is very rarely the liver cancer occur before occurring of cirrhosis. Especially hepatitis B related patients may be having cirrhosis, may be having HCC before the development of cirrhosis. And hepatitis C related cirrhosis is one of the most important cause of development of HCC. Means cirrhosis caused by any cause, whether it is B, whether it is alcohol, hepatitis C, NASH, all can lead to HCC formation. But cirrhosis because of HCV virus is the most notorious, and hepatitis B can cause HCC with the before the development of cirrhosis, right? And HCC has been one of the fastest growing cause of cancer-related mortality recently, and overall 5 years survival rate is less than 15% because most of the tumor are detected at a later stage. So we have little option left. So screening in high-risk patients means screening in cirrhotic patients is very important, because by screening we can detect cancer at an early stage. If we detect at early stage, we can treat early and in a better way, right? So classifications, what is the need for classification? There are many various classifications, and BCLC is one of the most important. So why to classify liver cancers? Because it helps in estimating life expectancy. At the diagnosis, what is the stage of the liver cancer is important to know, because we can tell the patient what is the life expectancy, and we can decide the treatment part also, depending on the stage of the cancer. And BCLC is widely accepted, validated, but the criteria are too restrictive. We have to be very restrictive. As mentioned in this chart, we have to define the stage as per it. So by BCLC, we divide into very early, intermediate, and advanced stage, and later terminal stage HCC. So we'll be discussing this very early. I will be discussing very early and intermediate stage, because advanced stage and terminal stage will be discussed by Dr. Denny and Dr. Razif. So what is very early stage? Very early means patient having compensated cirrhosis, child A, very good performance status, very small tumor, just detected, very small tumor. These patients, if are having a small tumor, very early. If the tumor size is little more, or there are 3 nodules, but should be less than 3, means no lesion more than 3 centimeter. Good performance status, child A or maybe child B. These are early stage. And if the tumor is multinodular, child A or child B, good performance. These are intermediate stage. If there is advanced stage disease, portal invasion, and extrahepatic spread, we call it advanced stage tumor. And decompensated cirrhosis or child C, it is a terminal stage. So I will be discussing very early and intermediate. So in early HCC and intermediate, the difference is that there is a difference in the size of the tumor and cirrhosis. If cirrhosis is child A and performance status is good, but very small tumor, it is early or very early. And if the tumor is multinodular and child A or child B cirrhosis, it is intermediate. In early stage, options are resection, ablations, and transplantations. In intermediate, options are locoregional therapies by ablations and transplantation. So we go back again, BCLC staging system. Very early, child stage A, small tumor. If patient is a candidate for transplant, go for transplant. If not, go for ablation or resection. Similarly, here in early stage means 3 nodules, no more than 3 centimeter. If the patient is having portal hypertension, go for transplant. If not a candidate for transplant, can go for resection if there is no cirrhosis. If patient having cirrhosis, should not undergo resection. Patient with cirrhosis, opt for transplant or ablation therapies. Similarly, in intermediate, patient is having child A or B, but it is multinodular. So patient is not a candidate for transplant. Here the question arises when the patient is having multinodular and cirrhosis, why not transplant? Because it has been seen in this patient there is microvascular spread. If the patient undergo transplant, after a few months, maybe 3-4 months, there is metastatic and it is detected. There is no benefit of transplant actually. So these patients are not chosen for transplant. They are chosen for chemoembolization or chemoradioembolization therapies, which are called palliative therapies. Okay. So we move for the therapies straightway. Resections. The liver resections. Liver resection means cutting a part of the liver lobes, liver segments. But the problem with resection is that it has to be done in very early cancers, and detection of early stage cancer is difficult because it is asymptomatic. A good screening protocol is essential for that. If the patient is under surveillance or screening, then only we can detect liver cancer of less than 2 centimeter, 3 centimeter size. So it is possible only in 1/3 of the cases, and that is also in a very good follow-up patients. If the cirrhotic patient is getting good follow-up, getting ultrasound, alpha-fetoprotein level every 6 to 12 months, only that then he is detected. If the patient is not getting ultrasound, early lesions are missed, and he is detected to have cancer at a intermediate or later stage. The survival rate 1, 3, 5, and 10 years is 20 to 85% in these patients, and 50 to 60% 5-year survival rate. That is in a non-cirrhotic patient. If the patient is having cirrhosis, then resection is not having a good survival. So it is advised if the patient has cirrhosis and SCC, even early cancer, they are candidate for liver transplant. But the benefit of liver resection is that it has a reasonable survival. In non-cirrhotic patients, there's a no waiting time, because in a patient of cirrhosis, if we want to go for liver transplant, there's a long waiting time for cadaveric, and there's a high cost for a live donor transplant. Patient need to arrange a donor, and it is very costly also. It is not widely available. Resection can be done everywhere, though the surgeon expertise is required, but reasonable expertise is required. So broader availability, low morbidity, low mortality, less than 2%. No issue of donor as in transplant, and there's no issue of immunosuppression, which is required in liver transplant patients, and there's a satisfactory survival in patients, those who are not meeting the criteria of transplant. And if the patient is undergoing resection, it doesn't preclude transplant, because patient can undergo transplant at a later stage. It can act as a bridge to transplant also. So these are advantages of resection, but drawbacks, as I told, it is very difficult to find patients at an early stage if they are not following properly. It is technically demanding on the surgeon part. There is a possibility of hepatic decompensation. If the evaluation is not good, patient can go under liver failure in 5 to 15% cases, and it becomes an important cause of morbidity and mortality. If after resection, residual liver remnant, which is functional liver remnant, is not good, patient may have rising INR, rising bilirubin, and can undergo have liver failure, which require urgent liver transplant. Also, if the pre-surgery evaluation is not good and the surgeon missed satellite lesions before surgery, it can lead to multifocal tumors, and there is no advantage of getting a resection at this stage. So there is a higher recurrence rate in cirrhotic patients, with a lower overall survival and disease-free survival. The overall outcome is inferior in liver resection, but it can act as a bridge to transplant. If the patient having waiting time, in the meantime, he can have a resection, and later when the donor liver is available, he can undergo liver transplant. So these are drawbacks and benefit of liver resection. What are predictors of liver survival after liver resection? The number and size of tumor biology. If there are microsatellite lesion, microvascular invasions, there is a bad prognosis. Higher alpha-fetoprotein level, bad prognosis. Underlying liver function is very important. As I told, if the patient is having bad liver function, means advanced cirrhosis or higher CTP stage of cirrhosis, there may be decompensation. And also the response to local regional therapy. Later on, ablation therapy can be given, and the response to this therapy determine the survival. So where resection is considered, there are three important factors: patient factors, tumor factors, and surgeon factors. So patient factors are comorbid illness like diabetes, other comorbidities, cardiac diseases, and hypertension, or what is the stage of cirrhosis, what is the performance status of the patient, overall build-up of the patient. If patient is having sarcopenia because of cirrhosis, there is poor performance status. Again, liver tumor factors are important. Tumor size, number of the tumor, where it is located. If it is located periphery, resection has good important, because subcapsular location, peripheral location, easy to resect, and there is a less chances of microvascular invasion and seedings. Functional capacity of the remnant liver determine the future progress of the patient, how the patient will behave after the surgery. Surgeon factor, again, intraoperative bleeding, how much liver is left after surgery, how much liver is devitalized during the surgery, and the vascularized part left behind, and all these factors are also important. So as I told, the peripherally located liver tumors have good survival because surgeon can resect a portion of wedge portion of the liver, and it can lead to good survival. Liver related factors is goal is tumor extirpations, adequate future remnant. The future remnant should be as much, the patient should not get decompensation, like a development of ascites, increasing bilirubin, increasing INR. This should not be happening. For that, preoperative workup is very important. The functional capacity of the liver is to be determined before going the resection. There should be minimal morbidity and mortality less than 2% after surgery. So functional liver remnant is very important, and portal hypertension, which can be assessed before surgery, is very important. In cirrhotic patient, there should be 40% remnant, and in non-cirrhotics, there should be 25% remnant. And cirrhotic livers, because cirrhosis is a complex entity, same child status patient may behave differently. There are other factors like performance status. I told sarcopenia, platelet counts, bilirubin, albumin. All these are very important. If patient is having advanced cirrhosis, there is higher short-term mobility, future long-term survival will be low, recurrence rate of HCC will be high, and there will be higher chances of post-resection liver failure if the patient is having liver cirrhosis. So for resection, minimal invasive liver resection is adapted. Both laparoscopic and robotic surgeries are good, and these are approaches adapted by the surgeon for resection. Predictors, platelet count. If the platelet count is more than 1 lakh, it is good. Presence of gastroesophageal varices means there is a significant portal hypertension, preclude resection. HVPG more than 10, again indication of portal hypertension, preclude resection. Splenomegaly, ascites, bilirubin, all these are factors for advanced and increasing cirrhosis. So these all factors should be assessed. If patient is having these factors, resection should not be offered to the patient. Then we should assess for the other option, maybe intermediate stage therapies or advanced stage therapies. So liver transplant, two important criteria are used. Milan criteria are used, which are very stringent. It accommodate either single tumor, not more than 5 centimeter, or 3 tumors, none more than 3 centimeter. So this is Milan criteria. UCSF, this is University of California, San Francisco criteria. Here the tumor size, they adapted more than up to 6.5 centimeter. And tumor size which was 3 centimeter in Milan criteria was adapted 4.5 centimeter, with the total diameter should be less than 8. So UCSF criteria was little lenient, wide acceptability, and these both criteria are good validation. The decision regarding selection criteria should be based on the 5-year survival, which should be at least 70%. Milan criteria remains the gold standard, but UCSF criteria are also well accepted. It provided little expansion and achieving a good acceptable survival. There are a lot of criteria also which awaits validations, and Milan criteria and UCSF criteria remain the gold standard for liver transplantation. So to summarize this surgery, resection versus transplant. So resection should be non-cirrhotic patient, early stage cirrhosis, late stage cirrhosis, transplant. Good performance status goes for resection. For transplant, we can take poor performance status patient also. No hypertension, total hypertension, like HVPG less than 10, platelet count 1 lakh, no splenomegaly, resection. Portal hypertension goes for transplant. If there is functional liver remnant, if we think we can leave adequate liver remnant after surgery, go for resection. If we think we have to resect lot of liver, residual liver will be less, we go for transplant. Solitary tumor or large tumor, single. go for resection. Multiple tumors, better to remove the liver and put a newer one. Less or limited vascular invasion, resection. And no vascular invasion. In transplant, there should not be vascular invasion. If there is a vascular invasion, tumor will spread to other extrahepatic sources also. So this is important to assess beforehand by angiogram. Then come the percutaneous ablations. Based on this, injection of substance like alcohol, acetic acid, or change in temperature by radiofrequency ablations, microwave, cryotherapy. These are the locoregional therapies. Radiofrequency ablation is the most widely used therapy of all, though it is very costly therapy. Single setting may be costing more than 10 lakhs in our settings. RFA and percutaneous ethanol injection are equivalent for small tumors. Larger tumors, RFA is better than ethanol injection. Now comes the important controversy of RFA versus resection. So area of controversy is that which one is better, where to go for resection, where to go for radiofrequency ablations. RCT has shown resection is better, and the trend toward the improved survival and resection is there. RFA is the good part of RFA is that it is less invasive, there are less complications, it can be done in cirrhotic patients, less hospital stay, but it is costly. RFA is not suitable for subcapsular surface lesions because the radiologist has to put a needle which delivers radio frequencies, and this called the heat effect. The adjacent tissue are burned. If it is very peripheral, it can lead to burning of the non-peripheral tissue, which are rather than liver tissues. So tumor has to be inside the liver, and there is a risk of heat sink effect, tumor seedings in surface lesions. So radiofrequency is a good first choice, good choice in small lesions up to 3 cm located inside where resection is not feasible. Resection is good for the peripheral lesions. So it has to be individualized. Peripheral lesions, small lesions, go for resections. Deep lesions, little portal hypertension, go for radiofrequency ablations. And also depend on the expertise available. Locoregional therapies are TACE, arterial embolization, transarterial chemoembolization, and drug-eluting beads chemoembolization, and transarterial radioembolization. These all are palliative in nature. These are all cause tissue ischemia by one or other methods. And the drug-eluting beads is comparable to TACE. Both has been theoretically it seems that drug-eluting beads, if are put by TACE, should be good, but there are equivalent results. And the agent of choice are doxorubicin and cisplatin. So the indications are intermediate stage SCC with preserved liver function. If the liver function are not preserved, then patient either go for transplant or go for the medical immunotherapy and chemotherapies. So the contraindication for TACE is portal venous thrombosis. Portal venous thrombosed, so how to reach the lesion, because the probe is pushed through the, there has to be chemolysis done, and liver being having dual therapy. So one supply is by the portal vein and one supply with the hepatic artery. If we are going on chemo arterial embolization, that means we are chemoembolizing the artery. And already portal vein thrombosed, then the blood supply to the liver will be hampered. So if there is portal vein thrombosis, we cannot go for TACE. In those patients, TARE is safe. And survival in TARE is similar to TACE. Approach to management, again, depends. What is the number? What is the size of the lesions? How is the underlying liver function, performance status, available expertise? As I explained earlier, we have to assess beforehand what is the stage of the patient, tumor, and what is the performance status of the patient. Then we have to offer the therapy. So to divide very early and intermediate. In very early, we go for ablations, RFA or ethanol injections, or liver transplant if there is liver decompensation or advanced cirrhosis. In early SCC, we go for resection for peripherally based small tumors, good liver function. RFA, deep-seated tumors, solitary lesions, and little deranged liver function with a good performance status. And liver transplant is offered when the tumor is multifocal and there is a liver decompensation. Patient is otherwise a candidate for liver transplant. In intermediate, we go for palliative therapies. If the patient is within UCSF criteria, we can go for transplant. If patient is outside UCSF or Milan criteria, we can downstage with TACE, then patient can go under transplant, or patient directly go for these ablation therapies with TARE or TACE. Thank you. So I think I didn't touch the advanced tumors. I left the part for Dr. Dini and Dr. Rajiv.
We are going to see what's new happening in advanced HCC, because few years back we were having only option of sorafenib, but now I would say in last I would say not much, in 2-3 years we have come up with some other options also, and where do they stand in the sequential wise we'll get to know by this presentation. So management advance, our presentation will be in this part: first line treatment and second line treatment. And this is a very quite oftenly seen slide, which we can see in every presentation everywhere for HCC. Dr. Mahesh had already shown very beautifully this early part of the treatment: ablation, RFA, dissection, TACE. I don't know now with the emerging radiation option, where do we can keep SBRT? I don't know about that. We can panel. We are concerned in this talk particularly for the advanced stage, C stage, where patients have portal invasion, good extrahepatic spread is there, preserved liver function, good performance status, because lifespan we are seeing that it is around more than a year. So it is worth treating those patients. If we talk about first line treatment, so we all know that there was a SHARP trial which we are reading and discussing since long back in my PG days also. So that time only this one trial was there on which this drug was approved, that is sorafenib as first line systemic treatment. And SHARP stands for sorafenib hepatocellular carcinoma assessment randomized protocol. So this was a phase 3 randomization study, 1:1, good number of patients, 602, divided into two parts, placebo and sorafenib. 400 milligrams standard dosing twice a day, with continuous dosing with no gap in between. Inclusion criteria they have taken by HCC, verified by histology. Child poop class A, good performance status up to 2. No prior systemic treatment was allowed in these type of patients. Prior surgical or local regional treatment were considered. And there should be some measurable disease. So stratification was also done based on microscopic vascular invasion or extrahepatic spread or ECOG performance status and geographical variation. So primary endpoint for this trial was overall survival and time to symptomatic progression. So we can see these curve that first one is showing the median overall survival. Although there is some difference in the OS, so sorafenib is showing 9.7 month median OS as compared to 7.9 months in the placebo. And but if you see the median time to symptomatic progression, so there was not much difference. Curves are all throughout going in similar line, and it's roughly around 4 point some months, 4.1 or 4.9 months. So not much difference out of these two options, either placebo or sorafenib. But still we were not having any option. We used to give this sorafenib. Median time to radiological progression was also improved a little bit, 5.5 months in the sorafenib as compared to placebo of 2.8 months. So response rate was very dismal, 2%. And 2 patients in the placebo arm also has got some partial response, 1%. So 2% was the partial patient had partial response. So obviously none was having the CR sort of thing. And obviously this was very troublesome side effect, I would say. Diarrhea, weight loss, hand-foot syndrome, hypophosphatemia were more frequent in the sorafenib group. So hand and foot was very problematic. Diarrhea was also more. So these are two main side effects which we were coming across in those patients where we had used to advise sorafenib. So all these side effects were there in good proportion. 80 patient had some or other side effects. Diarrhea was seen in roughly around 39 patients, and hand-foot reaction, anorexia, alopecia, weight loss were other common side effects. So other than that, another question comes: whether do we have any option of after surgery resection or even after TACE or tear? Can we give the adjuvant treatment? So that question was answered by this STORM trial, that there is no benefit was seen after these attempts, after either surgery or some other thing, local regional treatment. So this was compared placebo versus adjuvant treatment, and maximum 4 years was given. even that we are seeing the curve are going throughout same. So there was no difference in the outcome at any point of time, even after giving the adjuvant treatment with sorafenib. So to summarize regarding this sorafenib part, response rate very dismal, as I said, less than 2%, and 2 to 3 months hardly increase in median OS. Only those patients with Child-Pugh A with good PS was the candidate, and it was more effective in patients with hepatitis C virus, and no extrahepatic disease was seen. Only in those patients it was found to be effective, and no benefit as such in the adjuvant setting. So after that, there were so many other drugs which were there in the phase 3 trial, like brivanib, sunitinib, sorafenib with erlotinib. So all these were phase 3 trial, and good number of patients. We can see thousands, more than 1,000 patients were taken, and but still there was not much difference, and sorafenib remained the standard of care even after so many trials. So of late, in last 2-3 years, we have come up with the newer innovative drug, that is lenvatinib, and the trial was in which they have studied to sorafenib, which was the standard as of now in that time. And lenvatinib is an oral multi-kinase inhibitor that targets VEGF receptor 1, 2, and 3, FGF receptor 1, 2, 3, and 4, PDGFR alpha, RET, and KIT. So these were the targets where this drug is hitting in the tumor growth schema. So this was a global phase 3 non-inferiority study, and inclusion, no prior systemic therapy was allowed. More than at least equal to one measurable target lesion should be there. BCLC stage B or C, Child-Pugh A, ECOG good performance data, adequate organ function, patient more than 50% liver occupation, clear bile duct invasion, portal vein invasion at the main portal vein were excluded. So these are the key points, that portal vein invasion at the main portal vein was also excluded from this trial. So certification as per the racial distribution, Western versus Asia Pacific, and good performance status 0 or 1, body weight less than 60 or more than 60. It's also important because dose is separate for both. Less than 60 body weight, 8 milligram is the suggested. So primary endpoint in this trial, reflect trial, was OS. Secondary endpoint PFS, TTP, OR, and the profile of this reflect study was that male-female distribution, we see both arm was equivalent. Roughly around 80% was male on both sides, and 15% were the female in both arms. So racial distribution wise, if you see Asia Pacific regional distribution is 67, so more of Asia Pacific and less was the Western, 30% roughly. Body weight was also stratified. Child-Pugh A, B, C were also considered. BCLC staging were also taken. So BCLC advanced stage was roughly around 80% in both arms. So underlying disease of hepatitis B, C, alcohol, all were taken. More patients were of hepatitis B, around 50%. Baseline FP level less than 200 in 50%, more than 200 in another rest of the patients. So median baseline FP level was 133 in lenvatinib and 71 in sorafenib. Concomitant systemic antiviral therapy for hepatitis B or C was there in around 30% of patients in both arms. So primary endpoint, which was kept as a non-inferiority, was met, and both curve was similar in the OS curve. Lenvatinib showing in 13.6, slight benefit over and above this sorafenib. So slightly more than a year. And if we talk about PFS, benefit was slightly more, 7.4 months as compared to 3.7 with sorafenib. TTP also similar benefit sort of thing like PFS. And yeah, this is a very beautiful presentation in the sense that sorafenib has shown only 10% response rate. If we see RECIST wise by either investigator or independent review or some other criteria, so all throughout response was varying from 5 to 10%. On the other hand, with lenvatinib, so response rate was very good. it was varying from 20 to 40%. So up to 40% response we have seen with the lenvatinib, in which there were some 2% patient had complete response, 40% has partial response, and 30% has stable disease. So this was a very good outcome with lenvatinib despite having a non-inferiority result. So forest plot of subgroup analysis, different age-wise, more than 65 also, they are showing benefit, and male, female, both showing equivalent benefit, irrespective of weight. In fact, less than 60 are showing a little bit more benefit. So all these subgroup stage B and C are also showing the benefit in terms of lenvatinib.
मेरा sound हो रहा है क्या?
So most frequent treatment related adverse event was more than 15% patients. So hypertension was the most common side effect. More than 40% patient had 40% patient had hypertension, although grade 3 or 4 was only 20%. So other side effects were diarrhea, decreased appetite, palmoplantar, erythrodysesthesia, proteinuria, decreased platelet count, constipation, elevated aspartate aminotransferase, and few patient also has alopecia in this trial. So practically I have come across hypertension, palmoplantar erythrodysesthesia, few patient had diarrhea, and even decreased platelet count also. Whatever experience we have with I can say roughly around 5-7 patient of SCC on lenvatinib. So it was found non-inferior to sorafenib as frontline systemic treatment in advanced setting. So significant improved secondary endpoint was also seen, and toxicity profile was well tolerable. So another drug combination which was approved as a first-line setting was this immuno-oncological drug IO, that is atezolizumab, along with monoclonal antibody, that is bevacizumab, and trial name is I Am Brave 150 trial. Very beautifully designed, and it was randomized versus sorafenib. Inclusion criteria more or less was similar, and we can see the curve are clear-cut separated apart even at 6-month time interval. So PFS rate was 55% with this trial combination IO plus monoclonal antibody bevacizumab. On the other hand, sorafenib was showing only 37%. So good difference in the PFS. And if we talk about median OS also, sorafenib we know that roughly around 10 months or 13 months. But yeah, for this combination, we can see that OS is still not evaluated, means it's still going on. And 6-month OS is up to 85%. So good difference as compared to sorafenib. So after these 3 drugs which we have discussed in first line setting, are there any drugs which were approved in second line? Regorafenib was the one which came around, I would say, around 10 years back. So it is, but has not come into the practice quite oftenly because of side effects and not much response rate. So regorafenib is also an oral small molecule multi-kinase inhibitor, and a resource trial is the name. Different, all the inclusion criteria were more or less similar. Regorafenib in the doses of 4 tablets in a day was given for 3 weeks on and 1 week off, and as compared to placebo. So in the trial, they have shown that response rate was there around 10% as compared to 4% with the placebo. So this was we should keep in mind. This was for the second line setting where we don't have any other standardized option. So six months and median pressure also there. Benefit is 100% regorafenib, and most hypertension and syndrome, these are very troublesome side effects. OS of 56 months from first sorafenib goes to death. Another drug was cabozantinib, recently in Indian market. So that is Celestial trial in patients who have progressed after first line treatment. So cabozantinib is also an oral small molecule kinase inhibitor of c-MET, VEGFR, RET. So 60 milligram once a day versus placebo. And distribution wise, we see that prior to this therapy, 100% patient must have received sorafenib. Few patients must have been given regorafenib, no lenvatinib, because that was not available or approved at that time, I believe. And few patients even have undergone for chemotherapy. So these were the distribution. And summarize of the celestial cabozantinib trial was that median OS was 10.2 months for cabozantinib versus 8 months for placebo. Median PFS was 5.2 versus 1.9 months. So with sorafenib as only prior therapy, median OS was slightly better, 11.3 months as compared to 7.2 with placebo. So objective response rate of 4 with the cabozantinib was seen. So these were the second line approved immunotherapies, nivolumab, pembrolizumab, and nivo-ipi. So we all know that mechanism of action, PD-1 inhibitor, PD-1 plus CTLA inhibitors. So all the checkmate or KeyMate trial are there with showing overall response rate 14 to 20%. Yeah, maximum overall response rate is with the nivo-ipi IO combination, that is 32%. Duration of response is also reaching up to 17.5 months. So after so much discussion, second line option we are having in those patients where they have taken sorafenib upfront. These are the all second line options with the respective phase 3 trials. And so which one is the better drug after first line depends on all these things. Regorafenib, prior sorafenib, how much tolerable was that? It depends on that. If it was problematic, then obviously we cannot give regorafenib because mechanism of action is almost similar. Cabozantinib up to 2 prior regimen were allowed for this trial, and ramucirumab is also approved as a second line. Baseline AFP is more than 400. Nivo and pembrolizumab durable response they have shown. We know that anywhere in solid malignancy, these have shown very durable response, long-term responses. So as per NCCN, we can see all these 3 combinations were approved as a first line and all the other drugs was approved as a second line settings. So these are the some guidelines, and more or less these are similar as I mentioned in the NCCN setting. So this is just the same thing. If patient is progressing on the sorafenib, we have all these options. If progressing on lenvatinib, we have other options which are left with. Thank you.
Points that we face in managing HCC, I would request Dr. Denny, Dr. Mahesh, and Dr. Sarthak to participate. So we'll be discussing this case. 55 kg, 57 years old gentleman with metabolic syndrome, diabetes, stage 2 nephropathy, child poop A, AFP 247, a good performance status, and a multicentric HCC with largest lesion of size 6 centimeter. There is no vascular invasion. There is no distant mets. So my question is to Dr. Mahesh or Dr. Sarthak, that what are the basic workup do you do if you suspect that the patient is having HCC, and how do you proceed with this patient, and whom do you refer this patient to? So anyone can probably take the question.
Dr. Mahesh, you seem to be on mute. So if you could just unmute your... Dr. Mahesh, if you can hear us, you seem to be on mute. So if you could just unmute your...
Yeah, sorry, I was mute. So first of all, as seen in your case, we can go for the back slide. Dr. Ajit, can you go back?
Yeah. So okay, multicentric HCC, largest.
So as you mentioned, child A stage means compensated liver cirrhosis with a multifocal HCC. So now we have to focus on the assessment of HCC, whether there is a vascular invasion, whether the distant metastasis. As you mentioned, there is no vascular invasion, no metastasis. We have to find out where the locations and size of the lesions. So as per this, we can classify this patient in intermediate stage HCC. So this patient, we have to assess for portal vein thrombosis. If it is not there, patient can go for transplant also. That is one. If patient is candidate for liver transplant, but if the lesion is 6 centimeter and there are 4 lesions, if the overall lesion are less than 8 centimeter, patient fits into UCSF criteria, can go for transplant. If patient is not fitting into transplant criteria, should go for medical management of the therapy. I think the workup is complete. There is no distant metastasis, no vascular invasion. We have to find out where are the lesions, what are the size of the lesions, what is the performance status, what is the cirrhotic stage. Then we should move for the therapies, medical management.
And to add, I think this patient is outside the Milan criteria, if we see.
Yeah,
and
he is outside Milan, yes.
So there is recent role of we say downstaging therapy for HCC, where we can we can consider TACE in this patient.
Yes.
And if TACE is successful and patient comes into the Milan criteria after TACE, then probably LT is an option. Otherwise, at least patient should be offered loco-regional therapy in form of TACE if suitable to decrease the tumor burden. That is what I think should be.
This patient may fit into UCSF criteria, and that is also widely accepted. It broadens the acceptability for liver transplant. The portal hypertension is not an issue here, but with multifocal HCC, child A stage, I think this is child A, and should go for an option for liver transplant, either directly or by downstaging.
So I think both of you have answered the question, but just for the sake of the DNB students and other students, what is the basic workup do you do if you suspect HCC in a cirrhotic patient, and how do you follow up these patients?
If we are going for transplant,
no, my question is, in a cirrhotic patient, how do you follow up?
We do viral serology, hepatitis, etiology of cirrhosis.
We have to assess the details of cirrhosis.
So this is for DNB. So how do we follow up, and how frequently do we do ultrasound? And when do you think that the patient is getting HCC, and how to refer?
First of all, we have to assess how much is the cirrhosis. What is the etiology of cirrhosis? What are associated factor in cirrhosis? First thing is to have to find out the etiology. Hepatitis B serology, hepatitis C serology. We have to find out. We have to rule out HIV also. With that, we have to look for, because patient is having metabolic syndrome, he might be having NASH-related cirrhosis. We have to assess that also. We have to assess the level of portal hypertension by going in per GI endoscopy, finding out varices. If they are significant portal hypertension, we may need bending also. Any sign of ascites developing, because that is an important, which shows there is a decompensation. Then we have to go for regular surveillance. If we are not knowing, if patient is not having HCC, suppose a cirrhotic patient comes to us, we have to assess etiology, stage of the cirrhosis. Then we have to keep the patient in follow-up for surveillance. For surveillance of HCC, ultrasound abdomen every 6 months is indicated, at least 6 months. Sometimes we can go for 12 months also. Alpha-fetoprotein is also important, but it is not that important in Indian patients, because we have found alpha-fetoprotein is not that important in our patients. So ultrasound abdomen, it is though it is a subjective, but it's a very good ultrasound is required to rule out any. It should be specifically mentioned that we are getting ultrasound to find any liver SOL, because that is the only thing which one can detect early.
Everything, Dr. Sarthak, would you like to add something else? So I think it's important that we should understand that we should follow up our cirrhotic patients every 6 monthly with ultrasound and AFP. And what?
No, I think, sir.
Yeah, and for this patient, I think first we should find out whether this patient is transplant eligible or not. If not, then we have to probably think about the local directed therapy, because there was no distant meds, child took A, and this patient had there was no vascular invasion. So Dr. Mahesh has beautifully covered all the treatment options. So RFA is restricted to patients who have a size of tumor less than 4 centimeter, and in this patient had a 6 centimeter. So probably TACE would be a better treatment option. So there are multiple randomized trials that have been conducted to evaluate loco-regional therapy in HCC. So as of now, I think there is no way to tell that this is better or that is better. So I think the best option is resection. Obviously, if resection is not possible, then any of the local treatment, ablative treatment can be done. So there are multiple trials which compared individual treatment option, and none of those trials have been able to prove that which localized treatment is better. And there are also randomized trial which have compared sorafenib with localized therapy, and in these trials also probably they have not proven benefit of localized therapy, especially in patient who had portal vein thrombosis or vascular invasion. So it's vascular invasion is a very important point in deciding treatment. So it makes the patient BCLC-C, and majority of the localized treatment option, they are not can be given in these patients. So probably the only localized treatment option that can be given in portal vein thrombosis is SBRT. And the role of SBRT in the present era of lenvatinib and immunotherapy, we are not sure how well we are placed with SBRT in the present scenario. So this is also one of the trials, SARA trial, which compared a radioembolization with the sorafenib, and it also did not reach its primary endpoint. So systemic therapy remains the standard of care in patients who had vascular invasion. So this is the second question. Second case, a 57-year-old male with chronic hepatitis B. It is continued, and this patient was treated with TARE. He had a stable disease on follow-up imaging. And after 6 months, patient presented with a new tumor thrombus in the main portal vein. So the question is now to Dr. Denny. Sir, what would you consider the best treatment option for this patient? His childhood status remains A.
So you said other part of the disease, stable disease, right? So I believe there is no progression.
There is
we have done
development of a new tumor thrombosis.
Yeah, so we have done the extensive workup with the PET-CT scan, and there is no extensive distant metastasis also, right?
Yes, correct.
So only in the liver limited disease, stable disease, new onset of portal vein thrombus.
Yes, correct.
The
patient has received TARE previously.
Patient has received
TARE previously.
TARE.
Yeah.
I think with this scenario, we go for the new patient, this TARE thing can be repeated. I believe.
Actually, or
if for the also, and I think for this type of humor. Yeah, Rajit.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah. So your voice was broken. So can you repeat, please?
Hello.
Dr. Denny, your voice was broken. Can you repeat? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just saying that I think TARE can be repeated in this scenario for this new onset of portal vein occlusion. So TARE is one thing which we can repeat it.
Okay. And would you like to start the patient, consider any systemic therapy treatment option for this patient?
If TARE is an option and TARE has done his job, this job of opening this portal vein, then I don't think that I will give as an adjuvant setting any TKI. If patient is not a candidate for TARE for whatsoever reason, so obviously I will give systemic treatment.
So if the patient is candidate for a localized systemic therapy, then yes, we'll go with that. Otherwise, we have to switch to systemic therapy. So this patient had vascular invasion and portal vein invasion, that is advanced stage, BCLC stage C. So that means that, and this patient already received TARE. So I think the thrombosis might be a relative contraindication for TARE. So yes, as Dr. Denny suggested, we'll switch the patient to systemic therapy. And what would be your systemic therapy of choice in the present era, Dr. Denny?
No, Rajit, I would just like to add one thing. Thrombosis is not a contraindication for TARE. Thrombosis is a contraindication for TACE.
Yes, but this patient already received TARE. Yeah.
So we can repeat.
Yeah, we can. Yes.
So thrombosis is a contraindication for TACE, not for TARE.
Yeah,
so
after TARE, we'll consider systemic. If the patient progresses, we'll consider systemic treatment option. And what would be your treatment of choice in the present scenario, considering we have all the options available, and this patient remains childhood A?
Remains childhood A. So if all the options are available, then obviously I will go for IO combination, Nivo-IP. Because that have shown best overall outcome in comparison to all available drugs. So if given a choice, cost is not a concern. So IO combination is the best option.
So yes, I think
so ipilimumab, which is quite available right now in our country.
So if the patient has financial, then patient has no financial issue, then patient remains childhood A. then I think in today's scenario, the best treatment option remains combination of IO or combination of Tecentriq with bevacizumab. And the important thing is that we rule out any bleeding varices, so that we does not because there is an increased risk of bleeding. So it's important that we do these copies and rule out or treat the underlying varices. So I think this has been discussed by Dr. Denny. The phase 3 SHARP trial that stratified patient with sorafenib in one arm and placebo in the other arm. It find sorafenib showing a significantly better OS of 10.7 months versus 7.9 months. And another study, Gideon study, which showed the tolerability of sorafenib in Child-Pugh A and B. So the problem with sorafenib that I think most of the clinicians has is that the tolerability of sorafenib. Hardly any patient we are able to start at a full dose, 400 milligram BD. So majority of the patients, if they are planned for sorafenib, they are started on 200 milligram BD. So this is the trial which was also discussed by Dr. Denny, the REFLECT trial, lenvatinib plus sorafenib, which was the phase 3 non-inferiority study. With lenvatinib in with the patients randomized to lenvatinib in one arm and sorafenib in the other arm. So this trial did not find any difference between lenvatinib and sorafenib, and the response rates were better in lenvatinib arm. The median OS was 13.6 months, and sorafenib was 12.3 months. Reached its primary endpoint with the non-inferior OS of lenvatinib as compared with sorafenib. So the secondary endpoint of REFLECT study was PFS. It was 7.4 months favoring lenvatinib versus 3.7 months. The important point I would like to add in that the HCC patients, they are not very chemosensitive or not very not those kind of tumors which show a better response in radiological imaging. So it is not always possible that we get a partial response when we treat a patient with TKI or IOs in HCC. So the important thing is that we use a modified RECIST criteria, and we also see the clinical picture and also monitor AFP levels before deciding what should be the further plan of action. So lenvatinib had a significant increased response rate compared with the sorafenib, and the toxicity profile of lenvatinib was also better as compared to sorafenib. The problem that we have with the sorafenib is increased incidence of hypertension, fatigue, HFS, deranged LFTs. So this diarrhea, so all these problems are also there with lenva, but these are comparatively much lesser as compared to sorafenib. So it's a very well tolerated drug. So the quality of life with lenvatinib was also evaluated in the REFLECT trial using the validated EORTC QLQC 30. And its HCC specific module. Lenvatinib was associated with delayed deterioration of role function, general cancer, pain, diarrhea, nutrition, and body image compared with the sorafenib. So that means that the quality of life was maintained with lenvatinib. And diarrhea and nutrition was there was a delay of over a month for symptom worsening in patients taking lenvatinib. The same patient that we were discussing, the patient was started on lenvatinib 8 milligram per oral. The recommended dose for less than 60 kg is 8 and more than 60 is 12. But sometimes we do start with 4 mg in patients who have a poor performance status. So I think this question would be again for Dr. Denny. In your current practice, how many are being treated with the following first-line systemic therapy? So if you have these two options, what would be your preferred treatment option for patient of HCC?
In today's scenario, this question can be directed to even gastroenterologist also.
So I'll start with you, then I'll speak to Dr. Mahesh and Dr. Sarthak.
I already told in my presentation that I have roughly around 5-6 patients currently on lenvatinib and none on sorafenib.
And
so I have not used sorafenib in last, I would say, last 7 or 8 years. I have not used sorafenib.
And what is the observed average duration of...
Because as you earlier told, we are not able to give sorafenib in full dose. The patient we give sorafenib, they are decompensate, they develop jaundice, they are not tolerating it.
Yes.
Correct. So
I think is not a good choice.
Yeah. So I think because of the toxicity, sorafenib have almost we are not using it in any malignancy. I don't think that we are comfortable using this drug in any malignancy. Probably lenvatinib has replaced it in the whatever indications it had. And what's the observed average duration of response? Anyone can.
So average duration is 1 year. 1 year for lenvatinib. For sorafenib, we used to have roughly around 6 months only.
Okay.
For lenvatinib, we are going up to 1 year.
So I think that is for a HCC patient getting a 1 year PFS, that is an excellent thing. So this drug has really revolutionized the treatment of HCC, because we have so many generic drugs also. So the cost has also come down. And what is the optimal dose of lenvatinib used in your practice, and when do you alter the dose of lenva? So any one of you can take this question.
Generally, more than 60 kg we give 12 milligram, and less than 60 kg we give 8 milligram. And sometimes patient comes with diarrhea, then we need to decrease the dose, but otherwise they tolerate 8 mg.
Okay. And maybe Dr. Denny or Dr. Mahesh, so how comfortable you are using lenvatinib in Child-Pugh B and Child-Pugh C patients, and what is the dose that you start with? Is it the same, or you may adjust the dose according to the
For Child-Pugh C, not.
I'm seeing patient child B cirrhosis on lenvatinib, they are doing good with 4 mg twice a day, means 8 mg lenvatinib with child B cirrhosis doing good. The HCC multifocal, well controlled for more than 6 months. 2-3 patients, they are doing good.
Yes, so although it is indicated in Child-Pugh A, but we have experience and we are comfortable using in Child-Pugh B. And there is one more option in Child-Pugh B, is that you can use nivolumab upfront. And yes, as Dr. Denny said, that in Child-Pugh C, the survival is usually not very good. It is around 1.5 to 2 months, so it is not indicated. So it's better that we should not bother the patient and start any form of treatment. So this is the second question. 64-year-old male with HCV cirrhosis with metabolic syndrome, diabetes, Child-Pugh A, AFP 247, multifocal HCC, treated with TACE, developed disease progression, received palliative RT to painful bony sites, started on sorafenib 400 milligram, developed the increased BP and hand-foot syndrome, had stable disease and had a AFP decline to nadir of 120 over 6 months, and then developed rising AFP. And now the patient's AFP is more than 1000. So basically metastatic HCC progressed on sorafenib, and now with an AFP of more than 1000. So what would be the good performance status? So what would be the next treatment option for this patient?
So all these options are there, but I think best option will be IO therapy, immuno-oncological drug in this scenario, because more or less other drugs have more or less some sort of similar mechanism of action, little bit different. So nivolumab is the best option as second line.
So yes, I think nivolumab is the option that we can choose, and there is one more option with a AFP more than 400. There is some data that Cyremza might be a drug which can lead to response in this patient, but yes, IO is the preferred option. But if IO is not possible or feasible, then out of these options that is available, then I think Cyremza should be the next option. So in this REACH trial, which was testing Cyremza in HCC setting, it showed that Cyremza improves the overall survival in second line setting patient in the patients with an AFP level of more than or equal to 400. So the subgroup analysis, you can see from this graph that this favors Cyremza as compared to placebo, especially in those patients who had an AFP of more than 400 with a median OS 7.8 versus 4.2 months. So, and in AFP more than 400, the overall median OS is 10.2 months as compared to 6.7 in the placebo arm. So, adverse events of special interest with Cyremza, we know that is increased BP and bleeding tendencies. So the decision making, I think we have discussed this. Decision making depends on the AFP levels, the number of lesions, the vascular invasion, whether the cirrhosis is compensated or not, and what all treatment option the patient has received. So basically, it's patient-related factors, disease-related factors, and in today's world, the financial factors. So checkpoint inhibitors, I think we'll skip this. Dr. Denny has already discussed. So we have options of nivolumab, pembrolizumab in second-line setting, and we have also option of nivolumab in poor performance status of who are child A or B in first-line setting. And there are emerging checkpoint inhibitors also under investigation for HCC. So Checkmate 40 was the trial of nivolumab in HCC, which evaluated the safety and overall response rate of nivolumab. So we have discussed all this, so I'll skip this. So Checkmate 459, it was a randomized trial of nivolumab versus sorafenib with overall survival as the primary endpoint. This trial did not reach a statistical significance. So sorafenib was still the winner, but it gave us one more option in those patients who are not fit for probably TKIs in first-line setting that we can use nivolumab. And Keynote 224 was a phase 2 study of pembrolizumab in a previously treated HCC patient. We have discussed all this. I'll skip this. And Keynote 240 was a phase 3 study comparing pembro with best supportive care as second-line therapy. So after these trials, we know that nivolumab and pembrolizumab, they are approved in second-line treatment for HCC. And pembrolizumab reduced the risk of death by 22% and also improved the PFS over placebo. So new directions with immunotherapy, there are plenty of new trials with very fancy names that are coming up, not only in HCC, but most of the solid malignancies. So probably in future, we'll have more upfront options of IO, either IO-IO combination or IO-VEGF inhibitor or IO-TKI in HCC. So this is, I think, probably the last question of today's meeting. So which of the following is the most useful for guiding the selection and sequencing of targeted therapy for second-line treatment of advanced HCC? So this question will again go to Dr. Denny only. So out of these 5, whether you want to choose one or whether you want to choose more than 2, so which is the most useful indicator?
I think most useful will be the 4th point. What is the FP level and tolerance to the first-line treatment? So this is the first and foremost. And obviously, if we are considering IO as an option, so PDL1 expression is also required. So most appropriate is the 4th one is the choice.
Yes, I think there is definitely AFP level and tolerance, and what treatment we have given is the first-line treatment option. Is the first-line therapy is the and there is one more question. So which targeted option would you select for a patient? I think we have answered this. So to conclude, there are multiple new treatment options are available in second line for advanced HCC. There are options of anti-angiogenic therapies like regorafenib, like cabozantinib, like Cyremza with AFP level of more than equal to 400. There are options of immune checkpoint inhibitors like nivolumab, pembrolizumab, and studies are ongoing which are combining 1 or 2 options. And the expanding treatment landscape will probably in future enable and require the intensified efforts to identify the biomarkers of prognosis and response to guide choice and how to sequence the treatment options. So thank you everyone for joining.